the Shark Deck.
Holy cow, so much to get to today. Hi, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news and another Dave Chappelle controversy. First, though, late night, the nominations announced for the 95th Academy Awards. I didn't talk about it yesterday because there's really nothing comedy in there, but Jimmy Fallon said leading the way with 11 nominations is the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's a film about all the places they found President Biden's classified documents. Love it. Kimmel again, the film that scored the most nominations was Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is up for Best Picture along with Top Gun, Avatar 2, Elvis, and 6 movies no one has ever seen, including a movie called Triangle of Sadness, which I always thought was a slice of Papa John's pizza. James Corden noted that Steven Spielberg was nominated for The Fabelmans. Spielberg is now looking to spin that off into its own franchise. Look out this summer. Too Fast, Two Fabelmans. Love it. Your headline, Dave Chappelle claims going to see his comedy shows is a huge act of defiance. I'm going to source here from Rolling Stone, Deadline, The Hollywood Reporter, and Consequence of Sound. This is the big story today. You may recall last July, a Minneapolis venue canceled a Dave Chappelle show. You got to be careful reading these stories. It'll make you think it happened this week. This was last July, but this week, Dave went on his Midnight Miracle podcast to react to the backlash nearly 6 months after the fact. Dave stated that protesters had thrown eggs at those lined up to watch his show. A video of one protester with eggs has circulated on the internet. Dave said, "They wanted me to say something inflammatory. In a weird way, they had the intention of inciting violence against themselves for publicity. The trans and their surrogates always say that my jokes are somehow going to be the root cause of some impending violence that they feel like is inevitable from my jokes. But I got to tell you, as abrasive as they were, the way they were protesting, throwing eggs at people, throwing barricades, cussing and screaming, none of my fans beat him up. In fact, the people in the crowd would just say, 'We love you.' Like, what are you talking about?" Chappelle also said, "Now, I have a belief that the gay community is not monolithic, and I think that in regards to me, there's probably a variety of opinions throughout that. But there's a thing they do where they deliberately obscure what I think they believe is the intent of my work to make a moment of it that I don't know the work necessarily merits. You know what I mean? I'm not even mad that they take issue with my work. Good, fine, who cares? What I take issue with is the idea that because they don't like it, I'm not allowed to say it. Art is a nuanced endeavor. I have a belief that they're trying to take the nuance out of speech in American culture, that they're making people speak as if they're either on the right or the left. Everything seems absolute, and any opinion I respect is way more nuanced than these binary choices that they keep putting in front of us. I don't see the world in red or blue. Trying to silence a person like me, I don't think it has anything to do with being loved. They want to be feared. If you say this, then we will punish you. We'll come to First Avenue and F your show up, and we'll come to Varsity Theater and F your show up. They just don't get to do that." Chappelle also later claimed that he asked the protesters, "Where are the black transgenders at?" And I'm paraphrasing Dave here because he used an N-word in his response, but the gist of his response was the protesters were like, "They were just here." No, they weren't. "I was upset. I wasn't mad that they canceled the show. I was mad at the statement they released. You're sorry for booking me? What's there to be sorry about the position I was taking? I'm not even mad that they take issue with my work. Good, fine, who cares? What I take issue with is the idea that because they don't like it, I'm not allowed to say it. They want to be feared." Dave talked about the reception he got from the crowd that night. Dave said, "When I walked on stage, it was a huge ovation because suddenly going to see a comedy show was this huge act of defiance." Now, from the Rolling Stone recap of this, they wrote, Chappelle even had a chance to save himself at one point during the podcast. A co-host tries to imply that Chappelle was pro-everything when it came to trans rights and that his performances were separated from his personal beliefs. Chappelle cut him off saying, "Slow your roll." I imagine we'll hear a lot more about this in the upcoming week. Meanwhile, from St. Louis today, the sold-out show by Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock Sunday night wasn't a laughing matter for everyone. For Tad Berry of Kirkwood, it was a big fun family night out until it wasn't. By the end of the evening, all he felt was frustration, pure frustration. So what's the issue? This thing with the yonder pouches again. And I'm with the civilians. Like, I get that the artists don't want people recording their set, but what are you really going to do with it? You're going to put it up on TikTok? Who cares? Dave, it's not like anything you say on stage doesn't get immediately reported anyway, right? And you kind of like the attention, let's be honest. So I don't know what we're doing with the yonder pouches. But the yonder pouches, this is when you go to a show and they take your cell phone away from you. It's 2023. We like our cell phones. Stop with this. St. Louis Today says, for starters, audience members' phones and smartwatches were locked inside pouches. After their tickets were scanned, patrons kept the pouches with them and could access their devices in designated areas on the concourse levels. Since patrons couldn't access their electronic tickets, staff members manually wrote down seat locations for them. You can tell somebody's really thought this out, right? We all have to have e-tickets, and then you can't have your e-ticket with you. Pick one. Lines for entry stretched for up to 3 blocks outside the venue. There were 3 separate entry points as usual. The show started late. DJ Trauma spun hip-hop beats before opening acts Donnell Rawlings and Rick Ingram performed 15-minute sets, followed by an hour-plus set from Chris Rock. It's believed he went longer than planned. DJ Trauma and a second set from Ingram came next. That's weird. A second set is weird. St. Louis Today said that looked like obvious stalling before Chappelle took the stage after 11 o'clock. That's brutal, Dave. Come on, man. What are you doing? Towards the end of his set, Chappelle explained that a mechanical problem with his plane caused his delay. For a while, he wasn't even sure the show would happen. He wrapped up his set around midnight. After the show, patrons had to find employees outside to deactivate the phone pouches. Some patrons took the pouches home and cut their phones out themselves. What a nightmare. Tad Barry, the frustrated fan, said he arrived at 7 o'clock for the 7:30 show, that's reasonable, and waited in line for 40 minutes. He says, I had a babysitter. I had to go to the phone area a couple of times and tell her that this was running late. The greatest frustration was it wasn't communicated that the show was going to start late and run as late as it did. If they had told us earlier it had been delayed, I could have worked with it to some extent. He wound up leaving the show before Chappelle came on. He asked Ticketmaster for a partial refund since he paid to see 2 headliners and only saw 1. Ticketmaster's response, nope. Another fan arrived at 6:45 and said entering the venue was kind of scary. It wasn't really a line, it was a mob. She says she saw patrons cutting the line. I think Dave is a genius. I would have loved to have seen him, but we live in the country. It's a drive. It takes time to get home. We did feel tricked. She left the show early during Chappelle's set. A statement provided to the Post-Dispatch from the Enterprise Center where all this took place said, a combination of factors, some anticipated and some unforeseen, created unique challenges to the guest experience at the event that venue management will use to prepare staff and educate patrons to mitigate any repeat occurrence of those issues at similar events in the future. The smartphone pouches, combined with a high volume of fans arriving for the sold-out show at the same time, created longer than normal lines and wait times. Give me a break. I was listening back to yesterday's podcast where I talked about the Jim Breuer thing, and as I listened back to it, I fear that I came across as defensive to DR, who is one of the super fans on the Facebook group, Daily Comedy's podcast group. Not my intention at all. I shot DR a note on the side. I did not feel like she was coming at me. I was not offended. I didn't mean to sound defensive, but I was trying to clearly choose my words yesterday as I walked through that Breuer thing. So DR, if I did you wrong, truly apologize there. Speaking of Breuer and Damar Hamlin, I saw this on TMZ. There's a conspiracy theory, and this is ridiculous, that was not Damar Hamlin at the game. Damar Hamlin appeared on TV wearing a mask, hoodie, and sunglasses. There was some bad weather, so it was a little foggy when the camera showed him in the skybox. Some conspiracy nuts are saying it's a body double. Maybe Jim could work that into his act. Justin Roiland, the voice of Rick, the voice of Morty, the co-creator of Rick and Morty. Adult Swim says they're no longer working with him. In a statement, Adult Swim has ended its association with Justin Roiland. You may recall I mentioned a few shows ago that the co-creator of Rick and Morty has been accused of some icky things. Adult Swim says the show Rick and Morty will continue. They will recast the show. Someone else will be doing the voices. Back in 2018, Rick and Morty was extended for 70 more episodes, so there's a lot more Rick and Morty to come. Well, hopefully somebody can do the voices. But the whole thing's a little weird. Justin Roiland still has several projects going with Hulu, including Solar Opposites, where he voices the main character. That show was renewed for a 5th season, which is interesting because only 3 have aired so far, so that suggests to me there's a 4th season already in the can or mostly done. Roiland is also the co-creator of Koala Man, which recently came out. I bet they'll just let that one go. Solar Opposites, it's kind of a big hit for Hulu, so we'll see what happens there. Tonight, 10 o'clock on your ABC, it's Jimmy Kimmel Live's 20th anniversary special. It features guests from the original premiere back in 2003. Those guests, George Clooney, Snoop Dogg, and Coldplay. That's still a great lineup, isn't it? Don't we have any new celebrities? It's 20 years to the day that Jimmy Kimmel Live premiered, January 26th, 2003. Kimmel told Variety, as anybody might imagine, it feels like it went by in the blink of an eye, and it also feels like it's been going on since the Middle Ages, but it definitely gives me a sense of accomplishment, especially when you go back and watch some of the old shows and you're like, wow, this is very unprofessional. Those nights where we thought it was a pretty good show, we were extremely wrong. Kimmel used to air at 12:05 after Nightline. Remember all that? January 26th premiere date was picked because ABC had the rights to the Super Bowl, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Oakland Raiders. In between the Super Bowl and Kimmel, the Alias episode titled Phase 1. That started at 11:15. Jimmy Kimmel also started late that night. Kimmel said, if you watch the first show, apparently I said about Coldplay, we wanted somebody that would still be proud we had on the show in 20 years. It's kind of cool, considering that's exactly what happened. George Clooney was promoting his 2003 film Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Kimmel said it was kind of challenging to get everybody back on this show 20 years later, but he said, it's kind of perfect. It's like a do-over. Everybody's scheduled. We managed to piece it together. Snoop Dogg is always the funniest because he's so laconic. You wouldn't think he'd get excited about something, but he's interestingly sentimental and enthusiastic. I heard he was sitting in his dressing room watching the monologue and just getting really excited about the fact that this was happening. Kimmel also spoke with E.T. and said, I had the displeasure of sitting down and forcing myself to watch the show's first episode this week. It's incredible that I'm still on the air on that first show. I didn't know George Clooney, and of course, he's George Clooney. So on top of being nervous about doing the show itself, and on top of the show being live and all those things that go along with, I had to talk to George Clooney and act like we had a relationship. I learned on the job, not only is it weird that we're still on the air, but it's weird all these people are still very popular. Kimmel told ET he has no plans for leaving anytime soon. Jimmy will host the Oscars in March. If you like what I do here, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/dailycomedynews. You can throw a couple bucks in the tip jar. I will take your money, and I will go to the National Donuts chain, and I will buy one of these iced coffees that I'm shaking here. This one's got about a third left. Anyway, I'll take your money, and I will buy a large iced coffee with caramel and milk, and even shout you out on the show. It's a nice, easy way to support the show. Buymeacoffee.com/dailycomedynews. I had a good workout this morning. I did a spin class, Apple Fitness Plus, humble brag, and I was watching Kill Tony. Now, you guys can all make fun of me in the schoolyard. I always talk about the Kill Tony podcast. I didn't realize they shot video and they put this thing up on YouTube. Did you guys know and not tell me? So there I am on the bike, and I'm staring at the big screen TV, and I'm watching Kill Tony. You know who was on the show? Get out your bingo card. Andrew Santino. That man is everywhere right now. So he's on Kill Tony, the newest episode. Very funny episode. Ian Edwards is one of the comics on the show. He is such a sniper. Reminds me of Pete Corielli. He would just come in, not say much, but when he did, crushed, and then got the ball back to Tony Hinchcliffe. I'll tell you, as I watch this thing, I think even harder than getting up and doing 1 minute of stand-up is standing there for the interview as you just get destroyed by Tony and the panel there, just nitpicking everything you could do. There was one guy that was up there forever, and I felt so bad for him. So watch Kill Tony, Andrew Santino, also available in audio form, of course. And as I mentioned, Santino is everywhere. I saw he is the guest on Your Mom's House with Tom Segura and Christina P., that podcast. I haven't checked that out yet, but why not? Santino is really funny on Kill Tony, too, and he's a charismatic dude, so I'm even more disappointed that he did a hacky proctologist bit on his recent Netflix special, because I do really like the guy. Quick hit on Gossip Corner. Kenan Thompson and Rachel Brosnahan at the Rangers game at Madison Square Garden the other night. Jim Jeffries announced a new special, this one coming to Netflix February 14th. It's called High and Dry. In the special, Jeffries muses on stoned koalas, his dad's vasectomy confusion, and choosing between his hair and his sex drive, and more. I blew off How I Met Your Father, but I missed a cameo. Spoilers coming up. You know who showed up at the end of How I Met Your Father? Barney. Neil Patrick Harris showed up at the end of the episode. Towards the end of the episode, the timeline shifts to a year after the events earlier in the episode. Sophie leaves her mom, Lori, played by Patrick Brewster, a hilarious voicemail saying she thinks she's dating her father, and then suddenly crashes into a luxury SUV. The driver comes out, and it's Barney. We're going to see more from Barney this upcoming season, which is fun. Also, apparently last year, Robin came back. I had given up on the show because it was, I don't know, slightly less than okay. I just didn't care. But apparently Robin was on, now Barney's on. So I see where this is trending. We'll do cameos and trick Johnny Mack into checking out How I Met Your Father. The creators say, whenever we talk about bringing back a member of the original crew, you want it to serve two purposes. You want to give some tidbits about what's going on in their lives, where they've landed and where they're at, but it's also about how they impact the How I Met Your Father story and how they send one of our characters in a new, unexpected direction. Similar to Robin last year, we'll learn more about where Barney's at, but also have a major impact on the trajectory and main narrative of our season. How I Met Your Father airs Tuesday nights on Hulu, so, look forward to that. Set the DVR. No, you don't have to set the DVR. That's not how Hulu works, Johnny Mac. What are you, from 1985? If you're in Arlington, Virginia tonight, a good one. The Heckler's Ball at O'Sullivan's Irish Pub in Arlington. The Heckler's Ball encourages guests to ridicule comics. Proceeds will go to Stand Up to Cancer. John Yeager is the founder of Callback Comedy. He organizes the event, and on the last Thursday of each month, it's heckling night. He says, "We like this because we can promote stand-up comedy as an art form that can be used for good. During the show, fellow comedians or select audience members stand behind the performers, lifting signs to cue when the crowd can begin heckling. Tonight's show features 10 comics, including Yeager. Some of the contests, best comic, best heckler, or best line of the night, they'll win some gifts." Yeager said, "Not to brag, but last week we gave out a prize of Marmaduke on DVD." Meanwhile, if you're in Indianapolis, this from Nuvo.net, local comedian Sarah Huntington will perform as part of the Keep Indie Laughing local comedy showcase. Some local Indianapolis comics, David Brooks, Dustin Burkett, Dwight Simmons, and Gwen Sunkel will be there. Sarah said, "I grew up in a town called Liberty, Indiana. It's super small, like the no McDonald's kind of small. So I grew up in an extremely small town, a little bit on the white trash side, and I think that's where my humor comes from. I always knew that I wanted to get away from that lifestyle. Like, I'm the first person in my family to ever graduate college and only the fifth to graduate high school. Once I got to Indianapolis, I was a little ashamed of my upbringing and how I was raised, but then I'd used humor a lot of time to be like, I'm white trash, I don't know any different. I'd just say those things out of humor instead of embarrassment, and then it kind of became my whole personality. This next part makes me feel so old," she said. "Growing up, my dad was really into stand-up, but he was into comics like Larry the Cable Guy and Ron White. Dude, I remember when we booked Jeff Foxworthy and they were like, 'Do you want Larry the Cable Guy?' And we were like, 'Who's Larry the Cable Guy?' True story. I could tell you where I was in the hallway at Sirius talking to Maggie Houlihan, who reps both of them. And we're like, sure, we'll talk to Larry the Cable Guy." This was like a little bit before Larry like really popped. So that Sarah Huntington was growing up when her dad was really into stand-up. I guess I have adult children now, but they would have been young too. It makes sense. 20 years goes by so quickly. Sarah said, "Growing up, my dad was really into stand-up, but he was into comics like Larry the Cable Guy and Ron White. They're fine comics, but I never really saw myself doing it because I never related to them. When I moved to Indy, I lived right across the street from Morty's Comedy Club, so I'd go over there for something to do." All right, Sarah, so who are you into? She said, "Eliza Schlesinger, and oddly enough, Bill Burr. But I think it was Eliza Schlesinger who I watched, and I was like, oh, okay, I could do something like that." And if you're in Windsor, Ontario this weekend, why don't you go see Ali Hassan? He's a comedian now, but he used to work in professional kitchens. Ali Hassan told The Star, "I miss that level of hard work. I always worried that I was lazy, but that's truly hard work. You're not sitting at a desk, you're on your feet constantly, you're feeding people. I miss that aspect of it. I have no regrets about leaving, but I have a tremendous amount of respect for people in the food industry." Nowadays, he draws upon his experiences as a chef for material in his current act, although he also finds plenty of fodder in marriage, fatherhood, and his South Asian heritage. He was asked which is more difficult, cooking or comedy. He said his need for instant gratification means comedy. You tell a joke, you hear the laughter, or you don't. If you send out the food, the plate comes back later and you wonder, did they enjoy it or not? As for his cooking, I didn't want to be the South Asian chef guy. I didn't want to make butter chicken. One of my favorite things to make was a tandoori chicken frittata, so an Italian dish, but it's got leftover spices in it. Butter chicken, in my mind, has been done to death. Ali Hassan at the Chrysler Theater, Saturday, 8 o'clock. And that is your very long comedy news for today. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your shows, and I'll see you tomorrow. Did you hear about the Border Collie who recycles trash when he's out on his walks? Or how about the bear that stole someone's Chick-fil-A, but good news, left the salad behind? Hi, I'm Johnny Mac, host of 5 Good News Stories. Don't worry, I have stories about humans too, like there's a woman who makes a living because she looks like Jim Carrey. It's my podcast. It's 5 Good News Stories. 5 Good News Stories. The number 5 Good News Stories. Twice a week. 5 Good News Stories. Oh, and Shamrock Shakes are back too. Good news. 5 Good News Stories, wherever you get your shows.